I'm Cynthia Becker, and I'm the host of the reality series CPS The Horror Stories. I'm not an attorney or a social worker, but I'm a mom who went through a CPS case and lost her children, and then after 2 years of fighting, I did get them back. I don't believe that CPS is about protecting children anymore, but instead I believe that they are about the dollar sign attached to each child's head. So, Raven, can you introduce yourself? Tell me where you're from and about you.
My name is Raven, and I am from Florida. I have two sons, and one is about to be 4, and the other is 1. And they're currently not in my care. They're still out of my care. Um, and it's been almost a year. It'll be a year in November. Um,
And what do you do for work?
I work at Publix.
Okay.
I've been working there for about 3 years now.
And did you, by any chance, experience the foster system as a child?
No, but my husband did.
Okay. And is he the father of both?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead, tell me, when did CPS first come into your life?
Um, well, in July of 2019, I ended up I got pregnant with my second son. My oldest was 2 at the time, and I had him, and I had a next door neighbor. We lived in public housing at the time. I had a next door neighbor that would come over and watch her grandchildren at her daughter's house. Um, and then I had to return back to work after my youngest turned 2 months old, and I ended up using her as a babysitter because of the fact that I couldn't afford anywhere else. I didn't know there was assistance out there. I had no idea. And my oldest never went to daycare. He always had a family member or another person that we had available at the time. And he did very well with that. Um, so when I didn't have a daycare, she offered to help me, and she said that I could pay her whatever I could afford, and blah, blah, blah. And on the days that her daughter wasn't working and she wanted to spend time with her children, she would come over to my house and she would watch my children at my house. Um, I didn't feel any threats against this woman. I thought she was a very nice lady. She was an older lady, I'd say about 50s, 60s. Um, and so a couple weeks after I returned back to work and she started watching my children, um, she was over at my house watching my kids that day, and she said, well, we went to work, and then when we got home, I didn't get a call or a message or anything at work indicating anything happened or anything was wrong. And when I got home, she kindly told me and my husband that there had been an accident earlier that day, early that morning. When I returned home, my youngest was sleeping in his chair. He looked fine. He was perfect, as always. My oldest was watching TV, and she said my oldest was jumping on the bed. Um, he was 2, and my youngest was 2 months, and she was changing my baby on the bed. And she said that he had a hard toy in his hand. He was jumping. He wouldn't stop. She asked him to stop. He didn't stop, and he jumped on top of my child, my youngest. Um, and the story kind of sounded a little weird after listening to it so many times and like going over and saying it so many times, because if I was in that situation, my first reaction would to be either pick the 2-year-old up off the bed and remove him, or take the baby off the bed. Like, no matter what, if I'm changing his butt or not, if you have an infant on the bed and an older child's jumping on the bed, that's a possibility, you know. And my first instinct would be remove the child from the situation in the first place. Um, but he had a little bruise under his eye that I noticed offhand. I didn't give him a full examination at all. I didn't. He looked fine. He was eating, drinking, sleeping. He was fine. So I told her, I was like, boys will be boys, you know, if you don't see a concern. She was like, no, I don't have any concerns, blah, blah, blah. I was like, okay. Well, later on that night, we ended up wanting to go fishing, me and my husband. We weren't married at the time, but we've been together since we were 12. So um, he, we ended up asking my mom to watch both of my children. Um, and throughout the time before when we were getting him ready, my youngest seemed a little fussy, but it wasn't like, oh my. So what happened is we dropped my kids off with my mom. There was two other adults there that night. It was my cousin who was a CNA and my mom's boyfriend. Um, and they both seen him and everything and hung out with him. We were gone for about 3 hours, I would say, 2 hours. And I did indicate that I thought he was a little fussy. I assumed he might have been teething. I didn't think anything about the accident. I just assumed, you know, there was other reasons because he didn't look like he was hurt. He didn't look like anything was wrong. And it wasn't like screaming pain. It was just like he wanted to be held the whole time and coddled and blah, blah, blah. And he was a 2-month-old. So I didn't really know his cries or anything. I didn't know his personality yet. I just, you know, I just gave birth to him. Um, and my mom didn't think anything was wrong. She did make a video that night of him sleeping on her chest because he wanted to just be held the whole time. And every single time she went to go put him down, he'd cry. And so she held him and she fell asleep. He fell asleep on her chest. But the other adults there didn't think anything was wrong either. My husband didn't, the babysitter didn't. That night, I noticed every single time I'd pick him up when he'd wake up in the middle of the night, he would whimper. And I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, you know, he was fussy, grumpy, whatever. He had a long day. Um, he fell asleep on my chest that night, perfectly fine. I got pictures, videos, everything. The next morning, my oldest was still sleeping. My husband went to work, and okay, and I had my youngest on my bed, and I was just looking at him and watching him, and he wasn't kicking both of his legs like he normally does. You know, normally babies do that little, you know, kick thing. And I thought it was weird. And so I started taking pictures of his legs and I started taking videos and like I tickled his one foot and he flinched it and he'd scream. And automatically I knew something was wrong. And so I messaged the babysitter. She happened to be next door watching her grandkids. And she was like, do you want me to come over and look at him? And I was like, sure, why not? So she came over. She indicated that she thought he looked a little swollen on the one leg, but I did not see any indicators of any swelling or anything. Even the pictures showed that there's nothing. And she was like, you should probably call the pediatrician. So I called the pediatrician right away and they told me to take him to the ER. I told them the story and they were like, bring him to the ER. So we went to and I packed up the kids. I messaged my husband and he made it there before I was even done packing up the kids. And we went straight to the hospital. The hospital was about 30 minutes away from where we lived. So we got in there and I told her the story and I told her about what was happening and everything. And she automatically ended up giving him morphine, like a baby dose of morphine. Yeah. She gave him morphine. We did first we did the x-ray and he ended up having the broken tibia in his left leg. And therefore she gave him the medicine and then they put a splint on his leg. Well, we were sitting in the hospital. Oh, my oldest was watched that day too by the babysitter because before we left for the hospital, she was like, you don't want to have your 2-year-old in there in the hospital with you and blah, blah, blah. She was like, I can watch him. And she sent me pictures. They went swimming in like a little blow up pool and everything was fine. But I kept everybody informed of what was going on. And so he had the broken tibia in his left leg. They did a full body x-ray head to toe. And we were waiting to leave the hospital. We were kind of wondering, you know, what's going on because it was taking forever for them to discharge us. And finally a lady came in and she was like, I need to explain something to you. Your 2-month-old has a broken leg and we have to legally contact DCF. And that's what we're waiting for. So therefore our DCF worker came in. She was a little quirky. She was new, definitely for sure. She took pictures of my youngest and everything and got the stories and blah, blah, blah. And she finally let us leave. She said that she was going to meet us back at our house where the babysitter was. She said she wanted to talk to the babysitter and blah, blah, blah. And they had a cop there that interviewed her and like took her statements and everything and reported her and blah, blah, blah. And everything was fine. She said the next day we would have to go to the DCF office for the medical examination. They wanted to medically examine both of my children. So me and my mom went the next day with the kids, and they did a head-to-toe examination. They checked their butts. They checked everything. My oldest was a normal toddler, obviously. He's never had any problems ever. I'm actually one of those moms that runs to the hospital for everything. So he, my youngest ended up having fingerprint bruising on him. He had one on his chest, one on his bottom, and one on his back, and then the bruise under his eye from the accident. I thought one of the bruises on his bottom looked like poop, but they wouldn't let me touch him or anything, and they were like, oh, no, it's fine. And they took pictures of him head to toe, and we went to a birthday party a couple days before. So I was thinking maybe that could have been the reasoning behind it, is because he was passed around by the children and everything. I mean, I was standing there, but God knows how, that he was held and stuff. So I wasn't too concerned about the bruising. I didn't think, they were like teeny, teeny, tiny, tiny bruises. And also, the babysitter, her grandchild is a little girl, and she likes playing around with the baby also, and her brother was younger and she kind of knew how to do it. But I mean, I think maybe the accident occurred by the child and she just wanted to cover it up, like maybe something else happened, but I'm not 100% sure. But they found her story to be believable, and so therefore they sent us on our way. We got home. Every once in a while, our worker would stop in and, blah, blah, blah. And she took statements from us, and there was a cop that came over that started an investigation, and she took statements, and they were talking about closing up my case. Oh, at the medical examination office also, she said that the lady at the medical exam said that she wanted us to go back and get another full head-to-toe examination. She said sometimes in infants, or I guess I found out later on it could be really anybody, sometimes fractures are too small to see until they start healing. So she said she wanted to just make sure there was no other fractures, nothing else was wrong with him. And she said in roughly about 2 weeks, she wanted us to go back and get another head-to-toe examination. Well, 2 weeks later, I ended up losing my referral. So I called my DCF worker and blah, 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 and I ended up just going in without it. But it was a few days after the time they wanted me to per se go. So therefore, they thought that I was hiding evidence at that point in time. Yeah, I know. And because I lost the referral, but I ended up checking him into the ER, and he ended up getting an examination that way. A couple days later, I was at work and I got a phone call from my DCF worker, and she stated that they found another fracture in my child. They said his right arm had a hairline fracture that was really, really small, but it was there in his right arm. And the other broken bone was his left tibia. Yeah. So therefore, she was concerned. She was like, something's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I asked her straight up on the phone, I was like, are you going to take my children? She was like, if I was going to take your children, you'd know about it by now. And I was like, okay. And she was like, I would inform you if I was going to take your children. I was like, okay, okay. And so therefore, the accident, like I said, happened at the end of July. July 31st was when we took him to the hospital. So in December, we ended up moving away. I think it was August is when we moved into a new home out of public housing. We rent from a landlord now. They ended up getting sent to a new daycare. They signed me up for the ELC program, which I never knew about. And I found a really, really great place who was amazing. And I told her my story, and she's seen us for a few months, and that was about it. In December, I ended up getting a message from my DCF worker, and she was like, "Hey, I think you need to get your youngest son checked out." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's wrong?" And she was like, "Well, the reports came back, and I feel like um, I seen like a difference in his skull. His skull looked like it was widening." Um, and she said there might be fluid on his brain and blah, 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 maybe bleeding. And I was like, okay. And I called the pediatrician's office, which seen him a couple days before. Yeah, seen him a couple days before. And they were like,
I
okay,
have
well,
like full body goosebumps.
yeah. She was like, we'll schedule an appointment for him, but we can't get him in until the next day. And I was like, no. I was like, if my worker is telling me that he has bleeding and water and liquid on his brain and a widening skull, I'm taking him right now. So I went straight to the ER, and the DCF worker was like, oh, you don't have to do all that. And I was like, what? Like, I was so confused because, if my son is in this much danger, blah, 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 why wouldn't you want me to get him in there right away? And the pediatrician's office wasn't really too concerned because, like I said, they seen him a couple days earlier and they said he was fine. So I checked him into the ER and I told them what was happening and what my DCF worker said. And the doctor came in and he looked at him and he was like, "This child's fine." He was like, "What did you say about him? What did they say?" And I was like, they said that he has possible liquid on his brain, blood, bleeding, and a widened skull. And he checked out his skull and everything. He like felt around it and he asked me about his milestones. He was meeting all his milestones. And they were like, "This child's fine." So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get my DCF worker on the phone and I need you to talk to her and tell her that. So I called her at 8 o'clock at night and she was kind of annoyed with the doctor. She got on the phone with the doctor. The doctor was like, "There's nothing wrong with this child. He's fine." And she was like, "Well, I want another exam of his head done. I want more x-rays. Since you're saying he's fine, you need to do another x-ray. You haven't done one?" And he was like, "No, this child's already been through two. And he's only a couple months old. He shouldn't be going through all of this radiation." And he was like, "I assure you he's fine, blah, blah, blah." So we went on our way, which the skull fracture and everything is still in my report from everything. They never took it off, even though they were proven wrong. So that was December. November 1st, the day after Halloween came around. I went to work. I dropped my kids off at daycare. I got out of work and I had a missed call from my DCF worker. I called her back right away. And she said, "Hey, can you come down to the office today?" And we moved away, so we were about 45 minutes to an hour away from the DCF office. And I told her I had a doctor's appointment with my children because both of them had a cough. And I told her I really didn't have the gas money to be driving down to see her. And she was like, "Okay, well, I really need to talk to you in person." And I was like, "Okay, well, what's going on?" She's like, "I have to talk to you in person. I have to tell you in person." I was like, okay. She's like, "What pediatrics office are you going to?" And I told her, and she was like, "Okay, I'll meet you there." So immediately after I got off the phone with her, I got on the phone with my mom on the way to my kids' daycare. And I was like, "She's messing with me. Something's going on. And I'm really concerned and I'm freaking out." And my mom was like, "Oh, it's fine. It's okay. You'll be okay." Pull up to my daycare and there is like, I'd say about 5 cops sitting outside my daycare. And I got out crying and shaking. And the cop looked at me and I looked at him and I was like, "You're here for me, aren't you?" And he was like, "Why would you say that?" And I was like, "I just got off the phone with my DCF worker and she was acting very weird." And he got on his radio and he's like, "Yeah, she's standing right in front of me." And he looked at me and he was like, "Ma'am, you can't go in and see your children. They're getting taken into custody." This is 3 months after the incident happened. I'll remind you, 3 months after the incident. And I was like, "Why? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah." He's like, "You have to wait for a DCF worker to get here." And then the DCF worker finally showed up. It was not my DCF worker. It was a whole nother lady that I've never met before. And she was like, "I can't tell you anything, but she was like, I'm gonna call your worker and she can tell you what's going on." So I got on the phone with my worker. We had it on speakerphone. And she was like, "Due to the fact that you didn't take your son to the hospital the night of the accident. He should have been in antagonizing, screaming pain. You should have realized something was wrong, and you medically neglected your son, so we're taking your children into custody. 3 months later, they thought they were so concerned. I would assume if they were so concerned from the beginning that they would, immediately take my children. Like, if you thought that my children were in that much harm's way, you should have taken them a long time ago. So that was kind of weird to me. And throughout the whole time, my caseworker kept telling me that they were going to close my case. Like, the whole entire time. Like, they were like, oh, we're just going to close your case. We're going to close your case. Your case is almost closed, blah, blah, blah. And we also did a safety plan after we went. I forgot to mention that. We did a safety plan for 2 weeks with the children after we went to get them medically examined. Where my mom or my husband's mom had to come in at random times and check on my children and make sure they didn't have unexplained bruising or anything, and they were fine. So we did that for 2 weeks, and we passed that with flying colors. Everything was fine, and they still ended up doing what they were doing. They said they had to have a sit-down meeting, and they all came to the conclusion that the children needed to be removed 3 months later. Yeah. So, I ended up calling a whole bunch of people. My mom had cases from when I was younger because my dad was abusive to her. So therefore, since there was DCF cases with that, even though she never put us in harm's way, they decided that she could not watch my children or have anything to do with my children. My grandmother had a DCF case that was from me. I lived with her most of my life. I didn't want to be with her anymore, and I wanted to move in with a guy friend that I had, and they were offering to take me in. So I made up a big scene and a big deal, and I guess DCF was contacted through that. So that was one case that was open with her, so therefore they did not let my grandma have them. So my husband's mom ended up taking my kids, which at the time I thought was okay. I thought everything would be fine. He is adopted, and she is the foster mom. She was in foster care herself, and she aged out, and then she adopted my husband. And then shortly after she adopted my husband, they couldn't have children at the time because her husband was messed up. And she had 3 of her own children after she could afford to have children. So therefore, my husband kind of got thrown to the side after that. And she kind of made him like the black sheep of the family because he wasn't hers. He was adopted, and she had her own children now. So therefore, now she has my children. She did end up getting a divorce from the guy, and married a woman. So therefore, there are 2 women watching my children right now. She's a CNA, so she makes good money. So therefore, everything looks pretty and nice. She just bought a brand new house. She has nice cars. Yeah. And we're, a basic 20-year-old family, like, my husband has been in and out of jail for pot charges. Other than that, he's fairly clean. In 2018, me and him separated. He got with a new girl, and we got into a fight when I was at work watching my oldest son. I was pregnant with our second son. And he messaged me threatening to burn the house down and take my child after I made a rude comment about his girlfriend. So he said he was going to kidnap our son and then burn the house down. Well, I freaked out, and I told him I was going to contact the cops. And I ended up contacting the cops, but I didn't think that everything was going to go on like it did. I thought, they would slap him on the wrist and tell him to leave. But he ended up getting taken into custody and had a domestic violence charge and blah, blah, blah for a threat for a text message. So therefore, since that happened, DCF didn't look into it. They came over to my house one time, asked me if I was okay. I dropped the charges the next day. They called me on the phone, did the basic, do you feel safe? Do you think that you're going to be in danger? Do you think your children are okay? And I was like, yeah, I didn't think any of this was going to happen. I'm willing to drop the charges. And so therefore he got released. We ended up getting back together after my second son was born. But due to that, they wanted him to have a battery assessment done for his case plan, because we ended up having public defenders, and she ended up talking me into having a case plan. She said my kids would come home sooner if I did a case plan instead of taking it to court. Yep. And I shortly found out that that was not going to happen. The DCF worker obviously got discharged from the case. They put a CPC worker on. My CPC worker hates me. I call her and message her a lot more than I probably should, because I want to know what's going on. So the very first day that I found out who she was and I got her number, I called her and I was like, hey, how long is it going to take to get my kids home? What do I have to do for my case plan? Blah, blah, blah. Are you going to sign us up for things? And the crappy part is that we moved to a different county. So therefore, our case was in one county and we lived in a different county. So she had to get an OCS worker for us, an out-of-county service worker, to provide us with locations that we could go to. So when we got our case plan, I told her, you know what, give me what you have. And until we get our OCS worker, we're going to go and drive to a different county and get this done with, because I'm not going to wait 2 months for a person to come in and schedule an appointment with me. So we did all of our parenting classes about an hour away every week. And we completed the parenting classes that were on there. Other than that, they just had the job and the house, and they wanted me to get a psychological exam with components, I guess. And they made my husband do one, but his was lesser than mine, which I don't know why they put my husband on there anyway, because at the time he wasn't really, he was there, but he wasn't, they charged me. Everything happened against me. It wasn't even against him. It was just me. But they made him do a case plan anyway, which I don't understand. So therefore, I ended up going and a lot of stuff. Trying to figure out where to start. We ended up doing our visitations with his mom. We would go over to the house when all of it started. And everything was fine. Obviously, I was a struggling mom. I had a 6-month-old child that was taken out of my care, and I wanted to be around him, I felt lost. And so I would message his mom and I'd ask her, when are you available? When can I come see the kids? Because there was nothing, no rules or anything. There wasn't any hourly. It was just whenever she was available. And then the CPC worker got involved shortly after that. And his mom's whole view of everything changed for some reason. I have no idea how, why, what, because everything was fine. And then next thing you know, his mom started putting more rules on us and blah, blah, blah. And then there was the whole, you have 15 minutes at the end of your visit. You only get this certain amount of time on certain days, and it has to be the same day every week. And, everything changed. And we were like, okay, whoa. So then we went to court shortly after that. And the CPC worker stood up in front of the judge and said, the grandparent doesn't want to do visitation anymore. And I was not informed of this whatsoever. And me and her made a set plan of days and hours just like they wanted. And she was okay with that. And she told me she was okay with that. And then the CPC worker stood up and said that. And I was like, okay, well, I have proof of something else. So the judge wanted to see her in the next court date. So I contacted her as soon as I got out of the courthouse. I was like, hey, are you okay with these set times and hours? Are we okay with visitation? She was like, yeah, that's fine. I was like, okay, well, the judge offered for you to come in and tell her that. So therefore, we can keep our visitations the way they are. But right now, they're taking our visitations away because you're saying that you don't want to do them anymore, supposedly. And she's like, I never said that. And so therefore, we did our visitations with a DCF worker on certain days and hours. My husband couldn't come because he, for his marijuana charges, he ended up violating probation, and they ended up putting him on community control shortly after that, which is a form of house arrest. which he was approved for he was approved for visitations, but he with his work schedule and everything, it didn't line up, and we had to drive to a different county. So there wasn't enough time, and he couldn't make it with his work. So I went to visits by myself. The kids did not get to see their father. They screamed my oldest screamed every single time he got put in the car with a worker. A random worker came and picked him up from daycare and brought him, which was weird because I worked near the daycare, and like there's parks and stuff around the daycare, but for some reason they wanted to drive 30 minutes away from there. So they would pick my children up where I worked and then drive them to 30 minutes away, which didn't make any sense to me at all. Because we could have just done it where we were, at a location at a park or something, but they didn't want to do that for some reason. They wanted to do it at a certain location. I guess they had other people that needed to do visits too, and they lived in that area. I don't know.
It could also be that they didn't want your kids to associate going to that place with you being there.
Yeah.
I'm just, which could, I know it sucks, but could be better for them, so they don't get depressed and worked up when they are going to go to that place, especially because they're so young. I'm just saying, just look at that point of view, maybe, and see.
Well, court ended up rolling back around again, and I messaged my husband's mom, and I was like, hey, court's coming up. I just want to make sure you're going to make it. You said you were going to come, blah, 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 and we can fix our visits. She messaged me back, and she said, well, I'm not subpoenaed to go, so I don't really think I'm going to make it. I have to work. And I was like, how are we going to get our visits back the way they were? We're only getting a certain amount of time, and it's less time than we had, and, it's uncomfortable, and I'd rather be there with family. And, she said, I think we should keep visits the way they are right now. I think it's all fine. This was a couple days before court, and I was like, awesome, you're fabulous. And she's changed her whole demeanor around after that. We ended up finally changing our visits. My grandma got approved after they investigated her case. She got a home study done and everything, and she ended up being able to pick the kids up on the weekends, because my family and my husband's family doesn't exactly get along, because my husband's family is kind of, snotty and so therefore my family wasn't able to see the kids unless something changed. So therefore my grandma started doing them on the weekends, getting them on the weekends, and we ended up doing our 4-hour visits with my grandmother, supervised. So I completed my case plan, and then my husband started his battery classes with a lady, but she said after the examination thing, she said that because it was a battery assessment, not the classes, she said that she wanted us to do counseling or go and see somebody, like a married couple at our church, because it was a Christian-based place. And she was like, you can just go and meet with somebody every week and like talk to them and do like a marriage counseling. But they weren't certified, obviously, because nobody's certified at my church, And I thought that was kind of weird. So we continued to meet with the lady that was mentoring us from our church, like she wanted us to. And a couple months down the road, I ended up calling her and I was like, okay, what exactly do you want us to complete? Like, what do you want done for him and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh, well, you should know that, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, you kind of didn't really say anything. You just said that we needed to meet with people, like, so then when we had our what's it called, our staffing done, we told them what happened, and they were like, oh, well, you're being non-compliant and blah, 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 and we don't think this place is a good place for you guys to go. But they referred it to him. They referred him this place. And they were like, oh, well, that doesn't sound right. And I was like, but you guys referred it. So therefore, when we sat down and did our home study, they said that my husband was non-compliant with that. When he did his psych exam, they also wanted him, the doctor recommended him to get on Wellbutrin, which he didn't want to do. He didn't want to be on medication. So they said, oh, well, he's non-compliant for not taking medication.
No, because had he taken it, then they would have said, well, he's got mental issues and we can't give you your kids back. So they told
Yeah,
me that I was on Wellbutrin and I wasn't on it. They give you, sometimes they give you those meds for other things because they'll
yeah,
mix them with something else to help other issues in your body. And I have significant health issues, and I was on it not for a mental purpose, but for, I don't remember, to be honest, what it was for, but it was help. Oh, it was for my lupus. They mixed it with Plaquenil and it did something. Anyways, they said I can't have my kids back because I'm on so many medications. And I'm like, it
it's
doesn't,
always an excuse.
yeah,
Like, they'll tell us we have to do a certain thing to get to a point and we can have our children back. And then once that certain thing gets accomplished, it's like, oh, well, what about this? And like, it's like, why didn't you tell me that months ago? I could have had this done and completed months ago.
that's
Well,
a
the
game. The
crappy part,
longer they keep your kids, the easier it is to adopt them out.
yep. Well, the crappy part is after that, when I did my psych exam, I did my psych exam in February. June came around and we had our home study. Well, when we sat down for the home study, they said that my husband was non-compliant because of those things. They said they wanted him to continue doing the battery class. And they said that this was as an out-of-county worker, too, because my worker's obviously not going to drive out of county to do our home study. So they had somebody else do it. And they said, due to him not taking the medication, they said that he needs to do the medication part. But they also, in June, right before that, it was like a couple weeks before that, the state decided to press charges for the same thing. And they were like, okay, well, we're going to press criminal charges against you and blah, 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 because of neglect of your child, which DCF did not want to do. And that's why it never got pressed and nothing ever happened. Well, I found that out like the weekend before, and we sat down for a home study and they found out about the criminal and they were like, oh, okay. And it was like, but it's the same thing that you guys are, I'm working on this case plan for. It's the same exact thing. Which doesn't make any sense. I mean, maybe they think that I might go to jail. I don't know. But besides that, what they ultimately failed us for is because I didn't do my codependency counseling. I thought I was done with my case plan, completely done, never heard anything else about anything. Well, February, before that, when I did my psych exam, the guy wrote down that he wanted to give us unsupervised visitation. And that was like my main focus at that time. I want unsupervised visitation. We got granted the unsupervised visitation through his psych exam. I did not get to read the report on me. I did not know what it said. Like, they don't just give you a copy of what they say about you. And I knew about the unsupervised visitation. So when I contacted my case manager about the codependency counseling, the reason why we ultimately failed the home study, she told me, oh, well, I assumed you already knew since you knew about the unsupervised visitation. And I was like, excuse me? She was like, yeah, I assumed that you knew that you had to do this. And I was like, I didn't know. I didn't get a copy. She was like, oh, you didn't get a copy? I was like, no, I didn't get a copy. And she was like, oh, well, you failed anyway because of your criminal, so it doesn't matter. I was like, excuse me? I was like, really? Yeah. Yes. I was like, no. I could have had this done months ago. This was done in February. It's now June. I should have known about this in February, not June. Like, so that threw me off and that made me really mad, which nobody cared about. When I discussed it in the staffing, they were like, oh, well, I'm sorry about that. And that was it. I was like, my case manager failed to do her job. That's her only job. Like, well, one of her only jobs besides making sure my children are safe, and she couldn't tell me about it. And that's the reason why we failed. But they said the house was fine. Everything else was fine. Our financial was fine. It was just those few things. So I did my codependency counseling. I knocked it out. I got my certificate on July 27th, and I'm completed with my case plan. Been completed with my case plan. In May is when we started our unsupervised visitation, which was really weird because the judge granted 4 hours supervised and 4 hours unsupervised. So therefore, we still do our supervised with my grandmother, and then we do our 4 hours unsupervised also, which everybody thought was kind of weird, If you are okay with me having my children, then you're okay with me having my children. It shouldn't be both. That doesn't make any sense. But I didn't want to fight it because of the fact that I was getting 8 hours with my children. You know, I don't care how it's done. I get more time. So I wasn't going to argue it. I was just going to leave it the way it was. Well, after I completed my case plan, I'm still going through my criminal. I hired an attorney, an actual attorney, which I made a mistake of not doing for my dependency case. And my grandparents gave me the money and everything because they didn't want to see me going to jail for something stupid. Yeah. So
Wow.
I'm still waiting for the state to give me an offer. They told my attorney that they were willing to they wanted me to complete my case plan, which I've done, and they wanted me to get my kids back and get my case closed. And then they said they would drop the charges against me. But then DCF is all like, oh, well, you have criminal charges, so we got to find out where you're going with that first, and then we can maybe work your kids coming back home. So, like, everybody's butting heads because the criminal won't get solved until my DCF is solved. So it's kind of like, what do I do now? But then recently, after our staffing, another staffing that we had, they wanted my husband to kind of be more involved and talk more during the case, like during the staffing. And I told him, I was like, okay, well, this time you got to talk. You got to tell them what you've learned, what you've done. You know, you have to actually be verbal instead of just sit there and be quiet.
Right.
Well, he was verbal, all right. He got on there and he was upset. You know, he was mad because they were telling him that his battery classes weren't acceptable, and even though that's where he got referred to, and they were saying that he wasn't doing a good enough job. They were saying they weren't going to bring our kids home due to that. And he got mad and he was like, well, the case manager doesn't know how to do her job. And like flat out said that on the phone to everybody. And he was arguing with them. And obviously you can't argue with the people that are going to bring your kids home. So therefore they said that his anger was out of control and that he might have anger issues, and he definitely needs the battery class now. So he started the battery, which still hasn't gotten approved by any of the workers because nobody wants to look up the company that we're going through, even though she is DCF approved and she is okay to do it. Our CPC worker refuses to answer any of our text messages or anything. Even though we've asked her multiple times. We've asked our OCS worker to check into it. He hasn't done anything yet either. So it's kind of like we're on a, like, you know, we're just going to do it and complete it and see what happens.
Right.
But they still want to know what's going on with my criminal. But the day after the staffing happened, they said, well, due to his domestic violence case in 2018, the one that he threatened to burn the house down for, they said that maybe it's best if I wasn't with my husband. And they said that if I left my husband and I moved out or moved him out, that they would give me my kids back. And they gave me that ultimatum. They were like, you can have your children if you leave your husband. And so I finally agreed that I would move into my grandmother's house to get my children home. I told him I would do whatever it takes. And then when he gets everything situated and completed, then we can both have our family back. You know, we can both have our house, like be in the same home. And because I messaged my supervisor's manager and I told her, I was like, the whole point of reunification is I wanted to reunify my whole family. But now you're telling me that you want to break my family apart in more ways? You know, that didn't make any sense to me, especially over a charge that happened 2 years ago that wasn't even like violent.
Right.
It was just a threat. So, yeah. So therefore, they wanted me to start doing domestic violence counseling. And I got on the phone with the domestic violence counselor. I told her my whole story. I told her what he got the domestic violence charges for and everything. And she was like, really? She was like, why did they take your children away in the first place? She's like, I don't understand. She's like, who knows that he has a broken leg? He can't tell you. And she's like, no children acts the same. You know, not every child acts the same.
Right.
And she was like, this is ridiculous. And she was like, I cannot wait to tell my supervisor what's going on with you and try and win your kids back because this is ridiculous. This is stupid. And she was like, I don't believe you need domestic violence in counseling. She was like, I don't agree with that, especially since there's been no other cases. He hasn't been violent to you. You're okay, you know, and nothing was physical. She was like, I don't see a reasoning for it. And I was like, tell them that. So, yeah. And now we're here today. So our case ends, our next court date is October 13th, and that's our permanency staffing. So I'm scared to death on what's going to happen because, I mean, I feel like the judge will be more lenient, I'm hoping, because she's the one who wanted the home study done in the first place, but we haven't talked to her since the home study happened, so she doesn't even know that the codependency happened and the criminal case happened and everything. So, and I tried I tried writing her an email, and that kind of spitfired to me because you cannot write judges emails when it's concerning a dependency case. You cannot talk to them at all. And so therefore the judge didn't read it, but everybody else in my case did. So they sent it to DCF, the DCF attorney, the CPC workers, and my attorney, and my husband's attorney. And yeah, the judge never read it. So.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure my husband's mom wants to adopt my children, for sure.
Sounds like it.
Since she's married to a woman and she can't have her own children anymore, and you know they're boys. She has 3 boys, well, 4 boys if you count my husband. She's used to boys and she loves them. And the children that she has, my husband's brothers are all kind of teenage years, middle school, and like they've grown very fond of my children. And when we thought that they were coming home, closer to our home study, it was about the cutoff point where we were like, they're coming home, like we won. And then everything else backfired on us. I heard from my mother-in-law that she sat the boys down and she told them that the kids were probably going to be leaving soon and they were going to their father's house, and when they came back the kids probably weren't going to be there, and they were very upset about it. And we heard this from my husband's father that is no longer with her because he takes them for the summer and stuff. And I guess she sat them down and they were all upset, but then when we found out all this was going on, she told them over the phone and they were so excited that they weren't coming home. And that kind of, I don't know, I understand because they're teenagers and they don't understand, they don't comprehend what's going on totally, but they were happy that my kids weren't coming home, they were happy that they were going to get to stay with them longer. And I don't know.
Don't believe that. Yeah, just.
That's my life.
I don't know if you know my story, but my mom took my kids and tried to adopt them. And the hardest and crazy part about all of that is when you're going against a family member and they run their mouth first, it's much harder to prove your side.
Well, that's the crappy part is that, when I tell people my story and I tell them that they're with family, they're all like, oh, well, that's great that they're not in foster care. They're with family. They're okay. And I was like, no, it's not okay. And I was like, it's 10 times worse, I swear. Yeah. And I told my mother-in-law that. I was like, it really seems like they're in foster care and they're not with family because I don't feel like family with you. And one of the excuses that she gave for ending the visitation is she felt bad to tell us that we needed to leave. That's what her excuse was. I feel like we're family.
Sorry, my mom did 2 visits. Then, thank God I had another social worker, not one from CPS, but a different type of social worker that happened to be there. And I had her supervise my mom supervising me without my mom really knowing what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so she wrote letters to CPS like, this mother, not me, is crazy and trying to keep her kids from the mom. And it blew my mind that they didn't even care what she said.
No. They don't.
So it's so hard with family. And then after 2 visits, by the way, after 2 visits, my mom went back and was like lying about me, saying how crazy I am and how I make her so uncomfortable. So very much like you, we were in one county, and so here's the crazy part. I lived in this county, my mom lived in this county. So the CPS case was in this county where I lived. Well, the visitations were out here at the visitation center when my mom said she can't do visits anymore. And what ended up happening was I moved over here to her county to be next to my kids.
Yeah.
They should have moved the whole case and the visitations. They didn't. So now we're both over here, driving over here to visit. And she rather did that than supervise a visit. Like, how stupid is that?
I know. We asked in the beginning if they could transfer us because the kids were living in Brevard County. You know, everybody was in Brevard County. But the problem is that the case initially happened in Volusia County. So they said everybody that knew about it and everybody that was involved lives in Volusia County. So it would be unfair to them to have to drive instead of us having to drive. You know, and we didn't even open a trial, so it didn't make any sense.
And then the other part, I'm sorry, I don't want to laugh. Toward the end, when the judge realized that my mom was the crazy one, he, and I got I had what's called a 29-day visit. And before I got my kids back. So a 29-day visit, so I had them for a month. During that time, my mom fought for grandparent rights. So he ordered her to have supervised visits, and she had to pay to see my kids. Now, what's crazy is, had she not been so nasty and tried to adopt my kids from underneath my nose, I probably would have still allowed her in their lives.
That's what I don't understand with her either. Like, why aren't you nice to us? Because you know that once those kids come home,
which they will.
Be it.
Yes.
Yeah. But she thinks that everything's, you know, they might not come home and blah,
right,
blah, blah.
It's going to work out her way, and that's what my mom thought. And then when the judge noticed all this stuff, because now that their visits were supervised and they were not being obedient to the judge's orders and the supervisor's writing notes, he took away their rights.
Which I don't know how exactly it works, because I mean they are adopted kind of, but I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with her being around afterwards. And I mean, if she really wants to, which kind of scares me though, because I know that she could possibly threaten it, you know, after they come home. She could make up stories or make up lies or excuses. So
you need to protect your children. And if this person like truly had their best interest at hand, you would be seeing your kids right now.
Yeah.
So trust me, I went through all this. These were my parents, my mom and dad. I miss my dad so much. And I actually tried to still have a relationship with him after all this stuff happened. Like, I did. And then I found out my mom was secretly doing shit behind my back, trying to turn me in again and have my kids removed again. She even contacted my attorney and offered to pay him to take my kids away from me. My attorney.
Wow.
So do not, because if they really, here's the other thing my mom did. My kids had all this stuff at their house because they had everything from our house, like their beds, everything, okay? And then, however long they were there, the 2 years, we got them stuff constantly, clothes and toys, and I never didn't let them take their stuff with them. You know what I mean? I wasn't that mom. Do you know what my mom did a week after court ended and I called her to get their stuff? I don't even think it was a week. She donated all of it.
Yep. I told her that. I was like, you know, I'd like my stuff back once, you know, they come home. Like, what are you planning on doing?
Yeah, I was like, I can't believe you love these kids so much you want to adopt them, but you can't give them their stuff back. And here's the other thing that happened. She had my car seats. because she took them from me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? She had my car seats. When it was time for me to have unsupervised visits, she told me, go get your own car seats. I'm like, those are my car seats. She wouldn't let me have my car seats.
Yep. Exactly the same. Yep. Everything. Yep.
So don't.
We have to change my children. When they go with my grandma for the weekend, they go in an outfit, and whatever outfit they go in, they have to return in that outfit. So therefore, at the end of our visit, towards the end, 15 minutes, we have to change our children back in the clothes they initially came in, socks, underwear, everything, and then send them back on their way. Like, it's so ridiculous. We discuss it like we're going through a divorce, you know? It's not anything else. It's divorce.
It
And
is.
like it's always scary though, because like I'll buy stuff like I really care about. Like I bought my oldest son this little necklace that had like this writing on it that said like a lot of cute quotes, and like I sent him with him because I wanted him to have something that, you know, reminded him of me when I wasn't around.
She took it away.
She still has it, but I was scared he was going to lose it. Like I was very worried about it. And she sends it with him on every visit, so he does wear it on visitation, which is, I was shocked. Like she started doing it these past 2 weeks, and like she's been giving it to him. I don't know if he asks for it or if she's
manipulative right there. Just be careful. That's it.
I know. There's here, like she does little things here and there. I bought him this little nightlight that's like a frozen nightlight that like shoots up on the sky. And like I wanted him to have it at my grandma's house, but I wasn't seeing them in between that time, and I wanted them to have it over the weekend. So I gave it to her, and I was like, I really want to see his reaction. So if you do plug it in at your house, please let me know, and please video record it so I can see how he likes it. You know, I want to see his first reaction to it. She's like, oh, okay. Well, my grandma didn't get it for 2 weeks. And then I found out after that she already bought him one and he already had one, and she just didn't say anything about it. And I was like, why couldn't you just tell me right then and there that he already had one at your house? You know, like she didn't record anything, she didn't take any pictures, there was nothing. I was like, wow, okay. I was like, what? Why do you have to be that petty? Like, why can't you just tell me he already has one? You know?
That was all the stuff. So when my kids had to have a box, like a safe, and if I got them stuff, if they chose to keep it, they had to put it in the safe. They couldn't have it. And for my daughter's birthday, I'd bought us a bunch of matching outfits. And I would tell her, next visit, let's wear it, or I'd let her pick. Then she wouldn't come in that outfit. She goes, I can't find it.
Wow. I wish my children were older because I feel like it would be easier, but at the same time, it's easier on them that they're younger.
Right.
So like it's kind of, I feel like it would be easier because they could voice their opinions, but at the same time, you know, they would hurt more from it, which I'm still scared that this is going to be traumatic for the rest of their life.
It will be. Unfortunately, it will be. That's the truth. But the other thing is that when they're older, they recognize the abuse differently. And it was so difficult to hear my kids come home and tell me, this is happening, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yep. Too, because like every single one bump and bruise, I'm gonna want to take my kids to the ER, and then they're gonna probably pick me up on that because they're gonna be like, why are you doing this so much? Like,
well, yeah, they're gonna say you have Munchausen's by proxy.
It's like, well, I mean, you took my kids away for something that didn't even happen in my care. Like, I did not even have my children when they ended up with when he ended up with the broken bones. You know, like it wasn't even in my care, and they did nothing to the babysitter. Not a single thing. I think she wasn't allowed to watch her grandkids anymore. They sent them all to daycare. But other than that, nothing. Nothing.
Wow.
Nothing happened. And I regret it every day not pressing charges, because after the whole incident happened, she still wanted her money for the time that she watched my kids that week. And I told her, screw you. I was like, no. I was like, I have to drive my kid an hour out of the way to get a cast because you couldn't watch my children correctly. I was like, no. Like, you're not getting your payment. Forget it. She got so mad about that. And then she was messaging me and she was all worried about, you know, if they thought she did it and blah, blah, blah. Like, I have the messages where she's freaking out thinking, you know, oh, well, maybe they think I did it. I'm worried, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. I found out later on, too, after my kids were taken, that her youngest grandson ended up with a broken bone, I believe in her care, a broken collarbone, when he was 3 months old because he fell off the couch. But then the doctor said that it could have happened when he was born, and they just didn't know about it, which didn't make any sense because it was months after he was born. So I don't know. But nobody cared about that. And then they tried blaming it on my husband because he had domestic violence charge. They said maybe he gets too angry and he hurt your child. I was like, are you serious? I was like, I was with him the whole night. He was sleeping the whole time. I was like, he wasn't around my child alone that whole time.
Right.
And then they were like, oh, well, maybe he got the second broken bone in your care. Maybe you did it. And I was like, the doctor even said that it happens after. You can't see it until after. And it was a hairline fracture. A hairline fracture. I don't know. But we're on month 4 of unsupervised visitation and nothing's happened. No overnight.
But you have unsupervised?
Yep. For 4 months. It's been 4 months now of unsupervised visitation.
And no overnights?
No overnights.
You have a paid attorney?
No, I have a public defender for my dependency.
You need to get a paid attorney.
I know. We can't afford it. We couldn't even afford the other one. My grandparents just did it because they didn't want to see me going to jail. So, which they're probably going to look into that too. They're probably going to be like, oh, well, she can afford a criminal attorney, but she can't afford a dependency for her kids. How much is she really going to fight for her kids? You know, like they always come up with something.
Yeah.
It's always something. But then they were saying that because I didn't want to get my kids back, I didn't want to leave my husband. They were saying that I was picking my husband over my children and that I have codependency problems. And it was like, no, that's not the reason why.
They do that because they just want to divorce you and everything else.
And when I was talking to the domestic violence counselor about it, she was like, they can do that. They can say that you can have your children, but take the rights away from your husband and not allow you guys to ever be together again. I was like, are you serious? Like, what? That shouldn't be right.
Right.
Especially since he hasn't done anything. Like, he's never done anything. But they're looking at him because of his pot charges, and they're saying, oh, well, he has this, and blah, 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 and he can't do his probation right. And, like, it's always something. But I'm hoping something happens. My public defender put in a request for reunification, but DCF denied it. So now we're just waiting to hear back from the judge, which I don't know what's going to happen with that. I don't know if they give them facts or anything, or if they just ask.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but I'm really scared about October because I don't know what happens at 1 year, you know? I don't know if the judge is going to be like, oh, well, you didn't do it, so you're screwed, or if they're going to be like, oh, your kids can come home, or, you know, I would be happy with anything. Just give me something. Give me a safety plan. Have somebody come and check on my kids every freaking day. I don't care.
Right.
Just bring my kids home. Let me prove to you that nothing's going to happen, that nothing happened in the first place. You know, let me prove it. But
it's not fair.
And so I also pay my children's daycare too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So what would you say to people that are watching?
Be very careful with who you trust with your children. Very, very careful. Even if it's family members, you be careful. Never go for a case plan if you know that you can win your case and that you aren't guilty. Always go for it anyway, because the end result will be a case plan. So you're not winning or losing. You're just possibly winning.
Yep.
And public defenders do not help.
Yeah, they don't. Well, I want to know what happens. Call and give us an update.
Okay.
And let us know, okay?
Thank you. I appreciate
it. I hope you have a good day. Bye.
Bye.